All right, folks, so today, rather than talk about something like nutrition or psychology, we're going to get back to basics and talk about the fun stuff, the training. Specifically, I want to get into abdominal training, going into the anatomy of the abdominal region, the different exercises that I think are better or worse for certain individuals and why. So let's get into it. All right, so first of all, one of the things that I hear very often about abdominal training is that it's somehow different than training any other muscle. It's still skeletal muscle, folks. Now, I will add the caveat that in general, I think for most people, the abs, kind of like the calves, are more amenable to strength endurance and are generally kind of type 1-ish fibers. But that being said, they still hypertrophy and function the same as any other muscle in your body. They're still innervated with motor neurons, and the prime drivers for hypertrophy are still the same. You got to keep tension on the muscle, progressive overload, volume, all those things. Now, before we move on, we have to do a quick little anatomy lesson because the layout of the ab muscles, the torso muscles, are a little bit different because they're in the middle of your body. First and foremost, you have your rectus abdominis, okay? So that's like your six-pack muscles. Covering those, you have a sheath of connective tissue called linea alba, and the shape of your six-pack muscles is defined when your rectus abdominis hypertrophies through that sheath. You have your external obliques on the sides, internal obliques, more proximal to the spine from those, the transverse abdominis on the inside. I'm kind of doing just a quick overview here. Of course, there's the various muscles proximal to the spine as well as the lower back muscles, but we'll do those in a separate video. And then, of course, there's the hip flexors. The main one to take note of would be the psoas. Fun fact about the psoas, this is the human equivalent of the tenderloin cut of meat in most mammals that we consume. But more than that, if you're any kind of athlete or fighter, this is a vital component of the abdominal complex, if you will. So we can't talk about abdominal exercises and neglect discussing the hip flexors as well. Then last, honorable mention, we got to include the sartorius, which is actually the longest muscle in the human body that runs kind of obliquely along the legs. This is kind of a goofy muscle because it counterintuitively can flex the hip but also flex the knee because of how it lays obliquely across the femur. This one, you'll find a lot of combat sports athletes will accidentally injure it, like guard pullers in jiu-jitsu. They'll accidentally overstrain it because, I mean, that's pretty much what pulling guard is, right? You're both kind of sitting up and also flexing your knees tight, so the sartorius gets a lot of work. And it's not really a muscle that anyone trains directly. So if you're doing odd positional things like that, sometimes you can get it strained. But anyways, moving on. When it comes to recommending ab exercises to people, the first thing that I look at is their torso to limb length. Now, the ab wheel, which I'll do a short on at some point, is not included in this video, but taking that out of the equation because it's somewhat of a different animal, being that it's an anti-extension movement. The primary movement that I recommend to individuals built like me, that is with a short torso and longer limbs, is this abdominal biased version of the toes to bar movement. What do I mean by abdominal biased? Well, the movement initiates by bringing my knees up towards my chest, starting with the psoas, with the hip flexors. And I've actually overtaxed my sartorius in the past by not keeping my feet together while doing this movement, letting them kind of go out to the side. So that's a bit of a technique pointer. If you start to feel a little tug on the inside of your knee when you do these, it means you're biasing your sartorius a little bit too much. But you bring your knees up with your feet together, and then what happens is once you pass parallel, as in your thighs get above the parallel point, in order to continue bringing your knees to your chest and then ultimately your toes to the bar, you have to flex your spine. So at the top of the movement, your rectus abdominis, your actual ab muscles, take over the lion's share of the work in the part of the force curve that is most difficult. The flip side of this, for people with longer torsos and shorter legs, what often seems to happen is the movement starts and kind of finishes biasing the psoas, and the abdominal flexion at the top just kind of gives the psoas a little bit of spot, if you will, to finish the movement, kind of like a force rep almost. And this is simply a matter of the physics of the force curve. It's no different than why different kinds of curls, for instance, are better or worse for different people depending on the length of their humerus. Today, for whatever reason, I was feeling froggy, so for a change of pace, I actually did sets of 15, increasing the per set volume by 50%, seeing as I regularly do sets of 10. As far as progressive overload, you could certainly add weights or hold a dumbbell between your feet, but with the hanging position giving you a massive stretch, I get plenty out of these with just body weight. Let's briefly talk about obliques. If you are like me with a short torso and long limbs, I wouldn't recommend direct oblique work in terms of like side bends and things, because your obliques really have nowhere to grow and you'll just get a very blocky torso. If you got a long, like Michael Phelps kind of torso, then you might want to do some direct oblique work to enhance your lateral stability. That might be a weak point for your spine. Okay, now today I did something different. I did some incline, aka rocket ship sit-ups. Now these, I would say, if you are a long torso, short-legged type, would be superior to toes to bar, as these are for me, start with the abs, bias the psoas movement. You want to start with your arms over your head, and again, same as with toes to bar, that arms over your head engages the obliques isometrically for lateral stability. And the key point here is you want to uncurl your spine so that the rectus abdominis stays engaged at the bottom during the stretch position and then at the top while you're at peak contraction. And then for me, I lean into the psoas sartorius involvement by dorsiflexing or pulling my toes back against the pad to get a little bit more involvement out of them, since I hardly ever train them directly. So that's it, folks. I didn't want to delve too deep into the biomechanics portion. This is just an example of how, when you're determining your candidacy list of exercises for different body parts to choose from, you really want to take into account how your structure works within the confines of that movement, and whether or not you're more or less amenable to the exercise. Thanks for watching.